Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the Greek Revolution. Now, we're going to be discussing this revolution from a bit of a geopolitical perspective, by which I mean we're going to be looking at who the great powers of Europe are at this time, what the interests are of those various European states, and how the interests of those states interact with one another surrounding the events of the Greek Revolution. So, before we get to the revolution itself, which starts in 1821, we have to back up a few years to the year 1815. At this time, after Napoleon's defeat, the European leaders, the leaders of all the European states, will meet to form a counter-revolutionary order on the continent. Basically, they seek to create a system by which these liberal Enlightenment revolutions, such as the French Revolution, will be prevented in the future. Now, this new order, which is designed to stabilize Europe, will be negotiated at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. And the famous Austrian statesman and foreign minister Clemens von Metternich will be one of the main architects of this anti-Enlightenment conservative coalition. And here we'll be quoting Wolfram Simon's biography of Clemens von Metternich. There have been doubts about whether Metternich had a master plan at the Congress of Vienna. In order to form a judgment on this question, it is necessary to consider Metternich's character as a strategist and as a visionary. Following the collapse of the Napoleonic Empire, Metternich had to master the political problem of finding a new foundation for the states of Europe and their relationships with one another. For Metternich, quote, "Politics is the science of the vital interests of states. Since, however, an isolated state no longer exists, we must always view the society of nations as an essential condition of the present world." End quote. If we apply this to the Congress of Vienna, it meant that Metternich's task was to identify the interests of the states who took part or were represented, and then to moderate them and constructively combine them. The form in which the Vienna Order was finally established fulfilled Metternich's vision. It was a European order based on shared laws and guaranteed by the 8 signatory states. The final act of the Congress of Vienna represents a bundle of contracts that redefine the world of the European states. It has even been called the quote-unquote invention of Europe. The foundational quadruple alliance of the Sixth Coalition had created an instrument for intervening when the system was threatened. Now, this counter-revolutionary conservative order that was created at the Congress of Vienna, even though it attempted to extinguish these liberal Enlightenment ideas throughout the continent, it didn't fully manage to do so. A lot of these ideas will still be present. There will be secret organizations that hold on to these ideas, that attempt to spread these ideas throughout the continent, and so forth. And a lot of these revolutionary Enlightenment ideas will actually begin to spread to the Greek merchant class. A lot of wealthy Greeks at this time are traders, businessmen, ship owners who have contacts with various Westerners through their business interactions. And through these interactions with Western merchants and businessmen and so forth, they begin to see how these liberal Enlightenment ideas may actually benefit them personally. And a lot of these Greek merchants will begin forming organizations, kind of secret societies, a lot of these kind of Masonic style organizations, if you will. Actually, a lot of the Greek revolutionaries, in fact, will be Masons themselves, but they will begin forming these secret organizations such as the Feliki Eteria or the Friendly Society, which we discussed a little bit in the past when we discussed the Serbian Revolution. But what these organizations such as the Eteria will attempt to do is foment Enlightenment-style revolution in Greece. Now, a lot of these members are, like I said, merchants and traders and so forth, but they also will contain notables, military officials, officers, clergymen, lawyers, doctors, teachers, and so forth. And the leader of the Feliki Eteria will be an Alexander Ypsilantis. He is a Greek revolutionary and a high-ranking Russian military officer who comes from a Phanariot family. For those who don't recall, the Greek Phanariots are basically members of wealthy Greek families who hold various administrative and ecclesiastical positions within the Ottoman Empire. Now, Ypsilantis, like I said, he is kind of a high-ranking member within the Russian military, and in fact, he did himself attend the Congress of Vienna alongside the Russian Tsar Alexander I. Now, after much planning and organization, in the spring of 1821, Ypsilantis and the Filikiateria believed that the time is right to launch this Greek revolution against the Ottoman Empire. Now, the revolution itself, ironically, will not start in Greece, but in the Danubian principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, in modern-day Romania. Now, the reason why the revolution will start there is because the Greek revolutionaries themselves aren't even located in Greece, but in the Russian port city of Odessa on the Black Sea. The reason why a lot of these Greek revolutionaries are located in Odessa is because, like I said, a lot of these guys are merchants and traders, and Odessa is a important port for Greek-Russian trade and so forth. Now, Ypsilantis also believes that the Danubian principalities will be favorable for the site of his revolution due to the fact that they are governed by Greek phanariots, or hospodars as they are referred to. So he believes that this is a favorable location for his revolution. He also expects that the Romanian peasantry will back him up and support the revolution based on their common Orthodox faith. Essentially, Ypsilantis, as we will learn mistakenly, believes that the artificial category of room within the Ottoman Empire is actually more stable than it really is. Basically, he overestimates the loyalty of the Romanians based on their common Orthodox faith and ignores the very real ethnic and national interests that conflict between the Romanians and the Greeks. He also believes, mistakenly, that the Russian Tsar Alexander I will support his uprising based on a common Orthodox faith. He also mistakenly believes that the Serbians under Miloš Obrenović will rise up to support him. Not sure why he thought that, given that he had Ypsilantis and the Filikiateria had plotted a coup against Obrenović years earlier, but nevertheless, Ypsilantis, as we will see, mistakenly expects support from a lot of different places where that support will not come from. Here I'll actually be quoting from Keith Hitchens in his book, A Concise History of Romania. The economic and social demands of the peasants and the political aspirations of the boyars intersected in the movement led by Tudor Vladimirescu, one of the major figures of early modern Romanian history. Vladimirescu, the peasants, and the boyars were stirred to action by the general uprising against Ottoman rule in southeastern Europe, initiated by Greeks united in a secret organization, the Filikiateria. Its leaders intended to free the Greeks from Ottoman rule by leading a general uprising of Christians in southeastern Europe. Alexandru Ypsilanti, the leader of the Eteria, was well placed to accomplish its goals. As a son of Prince Constantine Ypsilanti of Wallachia, he could draw on the connections within the Romanian boyars, and as a major general in the Russian army, he seemed a reliable guarantor of Russian aid. He and his colleagues had no doubt that the great boyars in Moldavia and Wallachia would support them because culturally they too belonged to the Greek world. Thus the principalities would provide a reservoir of men and supplies for the advance southward to Greece. Events were to show that the Eteria seriously misjudged the mood of the principalities. Although some prominent boyars and high churchmen welcomed the Greek insurrection as a means of throwing off Ottoman domination, they were equally determined to abolish the Phanariot regime and eliminate Greek competition for political office and economic advantages. The initiative for an armed uprising on the Romanian side did not come from the great boyars, but from a provincial leader of modest social origins, Tudor Vladimirescu. Born into a family of free peasants in Oltenia, he became well known to the people of his region as a local official, the head of the Corps of Volunteers in service with the Russian army in the Russo-Turkish War of 1806 to 1812, a merchant and an owner of land, which admitted him to the rank of the lesser boyars. They considered Vladimirescu the most able Wallachian military commander, but he himself had no intention of being merely an instrument of others. He had his own agenda. to free Wallachia from Ottoman rule, and to bring about political and economic changes to benefit the lesser boyars and the peasants. His pursuit of these goals brought him into a fateful conflict with the Greeks and the great boyars. Moldavia was the scene of decisive events at the beginning of March. On the 6th, Alexander Ypsilanti and a small force of Eterists crossed the Prut River from Bessarabia and entered Iași. Ypsilanti immediately issued a proclamation announcing the start of a general war to liberate all Christians of southeastern Europe from Ottoman rule and promising the Moldavians peace and security. Prince Mihai Sutu and the other boyars and high clergymen welcomed him because they thought the Russian military intervention was at hand. Ypsilanti and a small army of about 2,000 men set out to Bucharest, where he planned to join forces with Tudor Vladimirescu. But support for his cause had already begun to crumble, as word spread that the Tsar had condemned Ypsilanti's actions and thus was unlikely to protect Moldavia from Ottoman retribution. Tudor Vladimirescu, upon learning of Ypsilanti's arrival in Moldavia, set off from Oltenia to Bucharest with an army of some 8,000 men. He was determined not only to throw off Ottoman suzerainty, but also to put an end to the centuries-long predominance of the Phanariates, a goal he made clear in his promise to assist Ypsilanti and his army to move south to the Danube as quickly as possible. He was obviously relying on the intervention of the Russian army, yet he had no intention of turning the principality into a Russian dependency, for once Wallachia had been liberated, he wanted the Russians to withdraw back across the Prut River and leave the Wallachians to be masters of their own house. By the time Vladimirescu reached the outskirts of Bucharest on March 28th, the balance of forces had drastically changed. All hopes for the Tsar's intervention had by now vanished. To present a united front to both Greeks and Turks, he had to come to an understanding with the boyars. But he had another motive too. He aspired to become prince, and he intended to ascend the throne in the traditional manner, elected by the boyars and blessed by the church, not as a revolutionary. In the end, Vladimirescu achieved none of his objectives. Ottoman armies marched into Wallachia and Moldavia on May 25th, and the Tsar gave his approval for the quote-unquote restoration of order in both principalities. By now, hostilities between Ypsilantis and Vladimirescu had come to a head. Ypsilantis, wrongly suspecting Vladimirescu of forming an alliance with the Turks against the Greeks, ordered his arrest, trial, and execution on June 8th. Almost at once, Vladimirescu's army disintegrated, and shortly afterward, the end came for Ypsilantis' movement. On June 19th, his small force was defeated by the Turks, and a few days later, he himself crossed the border into Transylvania, where he was interned. Although the initial uprising by the Greeks under Ypsilantis was a complete failure in the Danubian principalities, almost immediately afterwards, this provoked another wave of uprisings, this time in Greece itself, namely in the Peloponnese and in central Greece. Here, the Greek revolutionaries were much more successful in securing territory from which to launch a wider revolution or war of independence. Now, the Ottomans responded to this with brutal reprisals against the Greek population in Constantinople. And subsequently, the Greeks in the Peloponnese and central Greece responded to these Ottoman reprisals against the Greeks in Constantinople by massacring the Muslim population within the Peloponnese itself. Here I will be quoting from Misha Glenny's The Balkans. The Ottoman Empire exploded. In Istanbul, Mahmud II accused Patriarch Gregorius of failing to restrain the Orthodox population in the Danubian principalities, the Peloponnese, Rumelia, Macedonia, and in Thrace. In early April, the Janissaries and the Turkish mob were let loose on the city's Greek population. Robert Walsh, the chaplain to the British embassy, witnessed how a young man was forced upon his knees by two Turks pressing on his shoulders, and then in that position a third came behind him with his kinshal, and with a single stroke he severed his head from his neck. The man's body was thrown into a puddle in the middle of the street for passengers to trample on, and his head was laid contemptuously between his thighs. The executioners then hastily passed on, leaving both to be torn by dogs who were gathered around. On Palm Sunday, in a desperate attempt to halt the atrocities, Gregorius announced the excommunication of all Greeks rebelling against the Ottoman state. This did not satisfy Mahmud, and 6 days later the Patriarch was seized by a group of Ottoman policemen while celebrating Mass, and he was hanged from the gate of the Phanar. The killing of Patriarch Gregorius was the start of a murderous purge of the Orthodox hierarchy in several parts of the empire. In Smyrna, the Greek population was decimated by the mob, which also slaughtered the city's chief mullah and several Turkish notables when they attempted to intervene to save the Christians. In the Peloponnesian Rumelia, meanwhile, a reciprocal orgy of violence had broken out. The Greek insurgents, who outnumbered the local Muslim population by a ratio of 10 to 1, embarked upon a series of uncontrolled massacres. Tens of thousands of Muslims died. This campaign culminated in the sacking of the main fortified town in the Peloponnese, Tripolis. George Finlay, the first great historian of modern Greece and committed Philhellene, was nonetheless appalled by the behavior of the Greek rebels. Quote, "Human beings can rarely have perpetrated so many deeds of cruelty on an equal number of fellow creatures as were perpetrated on this occasion. Women and children were frequently tortured before they were murdered. After Greeks had been in possession of the city for 48 hours, they deliberately collected together 2,000 persons of every age and sex, but principally women and children, and led them to a ravine in the nearest mountain, where they murdered every soul." So, what was the reaction across Europe to these events? Well, first, let's start with kind of the Western Enlightenment liberals and their perspective. So, among these Enlightenment revolutionaries, the Greek uprising was an epic and historic event. Basically, a lot of these people viewed the Greeks as kind of the founders of Western civilization, stretching all the way back to antiquity, and they had a very romanticized vision of Greece and its past and so forth. A lot of these people, these Enlightenment thinkers, will view ancient Greece as a kind of classical golden age, and a lot of these people will be referred to as Philhellenes, or lovers of the Greeks. They basically view kind of medieval Christianity as a dark ages that set Europe back 1,000 years, and that this Greek independence was a way to revive a rational or secular age that had been lost during these Christian dark ages. Now, as a Orthodox Christian medievalist, we here at Samuel's Fortress don't really share that vision of history, but nevertheless, that is the perspective of a lot of these liberal Enlightenment thinkers, and many of these Philhellenes will join the Greek Revolution. They will travel to Greece and take up arms alongside the Greek revolutionaries. Here, most famously, we have Lord Byron, who does so. Now, a lot of these Philhellenes, once they arrive in Greece, are kind of shocked to view that their romantic vision of Greece and the descendants of this ancient Greece don't really exist anymore. Those people are kind of long gone, and they are, again, shocked by the transformation that has occurred in Greece over these many centuries from antiquity until the 19th century. And here I will be quoting again from Michiglani. William Muir, writing in 1848, said, quote, "Politically speaking, the Greeks were Asiatics, and all their Oriental ideas, whether social or political, required to be corrected or eradicated before they could be expected to form a civilized people upon civilized European principles. Naturally, many travelers and Philhellenes were shocked at the Greeks' lack of sophistication and the absence of their physical resemblance to the Hellenes of their classical imagination. Quote, all came expecting to find the Peloponnese filled with Plutarch's men, Colonel Lester Stanhope explained, and all returned thinking that the inhabitants of Newgate were more moral." Now, as one could imagine, the more conservative and reactionary forces in Europe, the ones who gathered at the Congress of Vienna and were the architects of the new concert of Europe and the Holy Alliance, they were firmly opposed to this Greek revolution. Clemens von Metternich, for example, was vehemently opposed to any and all revolutionary activity within Europe, even if it was a Greek revolution, which he was sympathetic to. Basically, he viewed the partitioning of Ottoman Europe as opening the door for further revolutions, more conflict, more war, and so forth. And although, like I said, he was sympathetic to the struggles of the Greeks as European Christians fighting this outside Islamic force, this Islamic empire, he saw far too much danger in opening that door to revolution in Europe. And here Once again, we'll be quoting his biography by Wolfram Simon. It is often claimed that Metternich was possessed by a dogmatic attitude in favor of legitimacy, that it meant that he took the rights of legitimate rulers to trump those of rebelling peoples. This was not Metternich's political logic or way of thinking at all. He explained what the principles of international law meant to him in the Greek crisis as follows. If the European powers did not want to act in accordance with international law, then they could intervene not only to support the Greek rebels, but also to support the Irish and Finnish rebels. On what grounds could the British king or the Russian Tsar oppose such support? The revolutionary power of the rebels would in principle be put on par with the legitimacy of the state. Metternich asked whether the British government would be prepared to consider the next best rebellious Irish group as a power with rights equal to the British king, if that self-declared group proclaimed itself to be the government of Ireland. So what Metternich is arguing here is that even though the governments of Europe may be sympathetic to the Greek cause, once that Pandora's box is opened that would support rebellious groups within Europe rising up, then the governments of Europe should not be surprised when rebellious groups within their own empires demand the same rights that were granted to the Greeks. Like Clemens von Metternich, the Russian Tsar Alexander I also opposes this Greek revolution on the grounds that it disrupts the conservative order in Europe, which was formed at the Congress of Vienna. That is why Tsar Alexander opposed Ypsilantis and the Philikiteria during the Danubian uprisings. However, the problem for Alexander is the fact that Russian society is quite Philhellenic. However, it is not Philhellenic in the kind of liberal Enlightenment sense of the Western Philhellenes. Russian society is Philhellenic on the grounds that the Russian and the Greek peoples share a Byzantine tradition and an Orthodox Christian faith. Basically, the Russians do not glamorize the kind of classical pre-Christian ancient past of the Greeks the way the liberal Westerners do. The Russian society kind of glorifies this, again, medieval Byzantine Orthodox Christian connection between the two peoples and views the Russian Empire as a protector of the Orthodox Christian population within the Ottoman Empire. In regard to Russian Philhellenism, I will be quoting from an article entitled Russian Phil-Orthodox Relief During the Greek War of Independence by Theophysis Prausis. He writes, quote, "The Russian response to the Greek affair, therefore, while associated with the framework of European attitudes towards ancient Greece, was rendered distinct and unique because of Russia's Orthodox Byzantine heritage. A common Orthodox tradition, in addition to promoting a sense of cultural cohesion among Russians and Greeks, was a more valid and viable cultural bond than the reviving interest in classical Greece. For most Greeks, Orthodoxy, not classical heritage, provided hope and sustenance and served as a value system upon which to base their life and worldview. In contrast to most Westerners' preoccupation with the glory of ancient Greece, Russian Philhellenism thus presented a more balanced image of the Greeks, one which included both the classical and Byzantine dimensions of the Greek experience. The outbreak of the Greek revolt confronted Russia with a number of challenges and opportunities. For the Tsarist regime, the uprising posed the dilemma of preserving the status quo or supporting Greek co-religionists in the revolt against their quote-unquote legitimate ruler, the Sultan. Despite the Tsar's reservation about disturbing the balance of power and order of legitimacy, the possibility of Russian intervention in the Greek crisis raised the prospect of an expansionist Eastern policy directed not so much towards fulfilling Greek national aspirations as towards reaping additional strategic gains. In this context, the Greek issue could conceivably be used as a pretext to protect and extend Russian influence in the Balkans, Constantinople, and in the Black Sea. So here we see the tough decision that Tsar Alexander has to make. Does he continue to oppose the Greek Revolution on the grounds that it will disrupt this conservative order in Europe, which he himself was an architect of? Or will he support the Greek Revolution on the basis that it could be used to further Russia's geostrategic goals in the Balkans? So that is kind of the dilemma that the Russian Tsar is in. Now, going back to the conflict itself, after the initial success of the Greek revolutionaries in the Peloponnese, in the central region of Greece, the conflict does reach a bit of a stalemate. Essentially, there is a lot of Greek infighting that occurs amongst the revolutionaries, which prevents any serious offensives from being launched. Basically, they can't stop fighting amongst themselves for long enough to launch a serious offensive against the Ottomans, which will break the stalemate. And then from the Ottoman perspective, the empire is actually embroiled in a conflict with the Iranians. Basically, here we have the Ottoman-Persian War of 1821 to 1823, which prevents the Ottomans from accumulating enough forces in the Balkans to crush the uprising itself. And here I will be referencing Caroline Finkel's book, Osman's Dream, The History of the Ottoman Empire. The struggle that took place in the Peloponnese over the next few years was bloody and, in territorial terms, inconclusive. A first republican constitution was declared at Epidavros in January of 1822, but following the promulgation of a revised version the following year, a civil war broke out as the leaders of the revolt competed for power, adding further horror to the intercommunal massacres taking place in the Peloponnese and the islands. Opposed to those who dreamed of nationhood were those who considered their interests best served by a continuance of the status quo, the upper echelons of the Greek church who enjoyed status and privilege under the Ottomans, and prominent Greeks in Istanbul or the provinces, nor could anything be expected from the uneducated rank and file of the faithful. Russia maintained a cautious stance vis-a-vis the Greek revolt. Its desire to encourage co-religionists in the struggle against the Ottomans perhaps was tempered by an awareness that such encouragement might serve as an example to its own aggrieved Muslim subjects. The other European powers, reluctant to see Russia gain advantage in the Balkans, were adamant in their refusal to cooperate in schemes which might result in the partition of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans themselves were handicapped in their response by hostilities on their eastern frontier, where intermittent border incursions by the Qajars led to a war against Iran between 1820 and 1823, which further limited the number of troops available to put down the Greek uprising. Now, after this Ottoman-Persian War has ended, the Sultan is free to launch a full-scale invasion of the Peloponnese, of central Greece, in order to take back its territory from the rebels. In 1824, the Sultan will order a massive force to move up from Egypt across the sea and to retake the Peloponnese and central Greece. Over the next 2-3 years, the Ottomans will be successful in doing so, and after a siege of the Acropolis, the Ottomans will manage to retake the city of Athens as well. Here again, I will quote from Finkel. In 1824, Mahmud took the desperate step of inviting Mehmed Ali of Egypt to assist with his modernized army and navy, in return for which Ibrahim Pasha was to be awarded the governorship of the Peloponnese. Ibrahim Pasha set sail in July from Alexandria, but was not able to land in the Bay of Methone until February of 1825 because of Greek superiority at sea. First capturing several key coastal strongholds in the Mani, the Egyptian expeditionary force soon controlled most of the Peloponnese. On the Greek mainland, Missolonghi, at the entrance of the Gulf of Corinth, fell in April of 1826 after a siege of 15 months, and Athens fell a year later. Little territory remained in the hands of the rebels. Ibrahim Pasha's success served only to concentrate the attention of the European powers. However, Britain, France, and Russia set aside their differences, and 2 years of complex diplomatic moves culminated in the Sultan's refusal of a mediated armistice and the decision of the powers to blockade the Peloponnese. On the 20th of October 1827, the Ottoman-Egyptian fleet was destroyed in the Battle of Navarino by the combined Anglo-French-Russian fleet at Pylos in the southwestern Peloponnese, and Ibrahim Pasha's troops were evacuated. The Ottoman defeat made the great powers' intervention in the Greek state inevitable. Now, one of the reasons that Britain, France, Russia ultimately decided to intervene in the Greek Revolution was due to public pressure in support of such an intervention. There was widespread support amongst Europeans for the Greek revolutions and fear of Turkish reprisals on the Greeks once the Ottomans managed to retake the rebel territories. There was also rumors being spread around Europe at that time that once the Ottomans gained control of the Peloponnese and central Greece, that the Sultan planned to exterminate the Greeks in the area or to enslave them and ship them to the Middle East and North Africa, where they would be sold as slaves. The Ottomans would then repopulate the Greek mainland and the Peloponnese with Muslims from those very same regions in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, it should be noted that the Sultan completely dismissed these rumors as ridiculous, and it is often believed that the Russians helped spread these rumors in order to kind of justify intervention into the conflict. So we can see here that the dilemma that the Tsar faced, he ultimately decides to intervene on the side of the Greeks in order to gain influence in the region. And with public support, the European states and Russia will engage the Turks. And as we read here at the Battle of Navarino, which was a naval battle, the combined European force will crush the Ottomans. Now, based on Russia's intervention within the Greek Revolution and its participation at the Battle of Navarino, the Ottomans will tear up their prior treaty with the Russians, the Ackerman Convention, which will cause the Russians to respond by formally declaring war against the Ottoman Empire. And here we will see the start of a new war between the Russians and the Ottomans, the Russo-Turkish War of 1828 to 1829. And here I'll be quoting once more from Caroline Finkel. Within months of the defeat of the Ottoman Egyptian fleet in the Battle of Navarino, Russia declared war on the Ottomans. In April of 1828, the Russian army crossed into Moldavia, and by July of 1829 had reached Adrianople, only 200 kilometers from Istanbul, while their Caucasian forces had taken northeastern Anatolia as far as Erzurum and Trabzon, seizing many other fortresses along the way. The Ottomans sued for peace, which was concluded with the Treaty of Adrianople. Under the Treaty of Adrianople, Russia won the right to trade within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. Its occupation of part of Georgia and Armenia was recognized, and of particular significance, so was Russia's influence in the Danubian principalities. To Britain, especially, this development was an unwelcome milestone in Russia's achievement of control in the Balkans and over the Ottoman Empire. She was beginning to see Russia as a significant potential threat to her growing interest in the East. Over the coming years, the great power politics underwent a realignment, at the heart of which lay British determination to prevent the breakup of the Ottoman Empire to the benefit of Russia. In addition to the provisions which I just read, the Treaty of Adrianople also requires either the formation of an independent Greek state or the creation of an autonomous region within the Ottoman Empire, which will grant a great deal of freedom to the Greeks. Now, Clemens von Metternich here realizes that if things don't play out the right way, Russia could gain a great deal of influence in the region, which would disproportionately benefit them and throw off the balance of power which Metternich wishes to maintain. For that reason, Metternich supports the creation of an independent Greek state, which will have Western backing and will not be disproportionately beneficial to the Russian Empire. Here I will quote once more from Wolfram Siemens' biography of Metternich. It was in line with Metternich's pragmatism that as a result of the revolutionary uprising, he supported an independent Greek kingdom on the former territory of the Ottoman Empire. This actually contradicted the fundamental principles of the Vienna system of 1815. The restoration of a functional pentarchy, as opposed to the latest triple alliance excluding Austria and with Prussia remaining inactive, was more important to him than the repression of a revolutionary movement. In contrast to the image of a reactionary focused on legitimacy, Shedivi, the Czech historian, makes it clear that it was Metternich who pleaded for the independence of Greece instead of its autonomy, and he wanted to see it established as quickly as possible. The complete independence of a Greek state would more effectively block Russia's desire to expand than would autonomy under Ottoman suzerainty, because the latter would always provide grounds for Russian intervention. Over the next few years, the leaders of the European states will meet and negotiate to determine what form this new Greek state will take. Ultimately, they will sign the Treaty of Constantinople in 1832, which creates an independent kingdom of Greece. Now, this new Greek kingdom, which is formed, will include the territories of the Peloponnese and small portions of central Greece and a few small islands. Large portions of the modern Greek state, such as Epirus, Thessaly, Aegean Macedonia, Crete, most of the Aegean islands. Those will still remain under Ottoman control at this time in 1832. Additionally, at the Congress of London, the powers of Europe will decide who the monarch of this new Greek state will be, and ultimately they will decide that it will be Prince Otto, the son of King Ludwig of Bavaria, who will be granted the title of King of Greece. So that is the Greek Revolution from a geopolitical perspective. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.